I think some people's default is that society the way it is good. My default is that society the way it is bad. And the underlying action, or the action that underpins that, is break the rules. It's not break the rules to just like flunk stuff. It's break the rules if you see like a more productive way of doing things.
Hello and welcome to Graduate Theory. Today's guest is the founder of angel investing Ultraviolet Ventures. He's the founder of Next Chapter. He's interned at Goldman Sachs and he works part-time at venture fund GGBC. On top of all this, he is currently studying maths and finance at the University of Sydney. Please welcome to the show, Max Marchione.
Thank you, James. Awesome to be here.
Mate, it's fantastic to have you on the show. You are someone that has accomplished so much, and I'm really excited to kind of dig deep into get into your mind a little bit and learn more about how you think about approaching different situations in your life. But perhaps for the audience listening, I'd love to kind of do a brief recap of yourself and perhaps your university, end of high school to university journey. Finishing high school and going into university, what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, so I'll give you the rundown of like high school, university to now. And what I really want to make clear is I don't want to like glorify anything, because I think there's this tendency for narratives to be told retrospectively through like rose-colored glasses, and it sounds all planned and structured, and people see it at the end of the journey and they're like, oh wow, this person's amazing. Whereas I think 90% of people I know, including myself, our narratives were very iterative, right? We took one step at a time and then kind of got to where we were from there. So after high school, I took a gap year, and I call it a learning gap year. And the basic premise of this was to take a year off to learn things that you don't learn in school. So that included reading like 70 books. It included going to all these different like conferences and events in literally every industry I could find, and basically chatting with older people, right? Chatting with people that I got scared chatting with, and really just seeing the world for what it was. Next was university. So I started by studying law at the University of Sydney. And I think the reason I did that is because it's seen as like an optionality maximizing degree. And if you did decent in high school, the societal or the social default is to go into studying law, right? So I fell into that trap. I don't think I individually considered whether or not it was the right choice. So I fell into that trap. I started studying law. I did well in law whilst I was at university, but a year in, I decided, hold up, I don't want to become a lawyer. I'm going to be spending the next 5 years in uni studying law. Surely there are better uses of my time. So even though I liked law and was doing well, I decided to drop out of law, and I decided to put that time into all different other things. So this was like, call it a year and a half ago, right? And at this stage, I'd literally done nothing. I think people might look at things I've done now and be like, oh, you've done like a fair bit. How did you do it? And I think what I really want to get clear is like a year and a half ago, I had done none of this, right? So most of like a lot of the people who might be hearing this were literally just like in my shoes, just a year and a half different. That's the first thing I'll say. Since then, what are the things I've done? So I have interned at Afterwork Ventures. I interned at Goldman Sachs. Now I run a series of global communities called Next Chapter. I've started angel investing and run a syndicate called Ultraviolet. And then I was interning / scouting for GGV Capital as well. So that's kind of where I'm at now. Happy to dive into any of them.
Perfect. Well, yeah, it's interesting to hear. I mean, a lot of things about that. One thing I want to ask about is, I feel like leaving school, going into like your first year out of school, the learning year. I think that's how you describe it. Year of learning. It's an interesting approach. I think for me, thinking about when I was at that stage, I was kind of like, yeah, like let's just go and do a bunch of random things. Didn't really know at all like anything about anything. So it's interesting. Like at that stage, did you have like a clear, like, did you have sort of a vision for what you were aiming to achieve, or was it just kind of like, how did you just sort of stumble into that, or was it like clearly, okay, I want to learn these exact things like in this next year?
So a theme I want to come back to a lot is the idea of break the rules. And what I mean by that is that there are like all these social defaults around us, right? Things that we are expected to do. And people really like stop to question whether they're the right or wrong thing. So, like after high school, there are two social defaults. One of them is to go into uni, and if you did well in high school, you tend to study medicine or law. And the other social default is if you don't go into high school, then take a gap year to travel, right? Travel Europe, travel South America, wherever. But I don't think they're the only two options, right? And I questioned those defaults. I said, are these really the only two options? And I'm like, no. I don't want to just travel for a year because I get a lot of energy from learning, but I also don't want to go to university because I realize it's another structured system where you're kind of told what to do and you have set curriculum. So my approach was I'm aware of like all these different domains I find interesting. I'm aware of this like concept of mental models and multidisciplinary thinking, which basically just means combining ideas from lots of different domains. And I wanted to take action on like learning about those many different domains. The idea was to become a massive generalist in this gap year. I wanted to have like a 10% knowledge of as many different fields I could possibly find, whether that was health, whether it was property, whether it was finance, whether it was neuroscience, whether it was psychology. And the way I ended up going about that was largely through reading, largely through online courses, and then also through like going through all these events. To your question, was it like pre-mediated? Yes and no. So the idea of like a learning gap year was pre-mediated. What I ended up doing on the year, doing during the year, looked actually a little bit different to what I expected myself to do. I think when I was taking the gap year, I expected myself to start like a social media marketing agency and try and like make more of a business out of it. What I ended up doing was a lot more generalist and learning about all these different fields. And I think the basic idea there was the idea of like delayed gratification. I realized, okay, yes, maybe I can start this social media marketing agency and make a couple thousand a month, or I can sacrifice that and I can put all the time into just becoming a jack of all trades, master of none kind of person. And that's where I started. And then, like, hopefully in time, I'll start to become a master of one trade, but I'm not quite there yet.
Amazing. No, that's interesting to hear. And I wondered too. So you spent a whole year learning things and like only spending time learning stuff, which I think is really cool. And I guess that's to some degree what university is for anyway. But we'll skip that. But how do you think about that now that you've spent a lot of time? Like you said, reading courses, this kind of stuff. You've clearly spent a lot of time learning how to learn, perhaps. How has that year of learning kind of impacted yourself now and how you think about learning new skills or whatever it might be?
Yeah, so I say learn, do, learn. And the idea is you start by learning a little bit, right? You start by getting a tiny bit of knowledge in a field, but then you need to actually do. And this is the most important step. You need to take that little bit of knowledge you have and put it into action, battle test it, so to speak. And then you use the battle scars or maybe even the wins of battle testing it, and you learn from those. So that's kind of what I've done now. I think if I think of myself almost as like a startup or a product, when you're launching a startup, you start in product mode. And what I mean by that is you start by developing the product. You make a really good product. You test it in like a closed alpha test with like a small group of users, and then you go to market. Then you have go to market phase and growth phase. You start with product phase and then like go to market and growth phase. And I think like inadvertently, that's kind of what I ended up doing. I think I started in that learn slash product phase, right? I started with the learning gap year, and now I've moved to the growth, go to market, doing phase. And by doing, I've realized just how much more quickly you learn. And doing for me looks like a couple of things at the moment. It looks like next chapter, which is that collective of communities and the online media platform, and then it also looks like angel investing with Ultraviolet, and then a couple other things here and there. So that's how I've kind of thought about my learning from the gap year, and then transitioning that into action and more practical learning nowadays.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that, right? Because yeah, I think I agree with what you're saying. Like the action is so important, and even I was listening or maybe reading to something recently, and they were talking about learning in the sense that you just do so much that you sort of have to learn to keep doing stuff, and that becomes the handbrake rather than just kind of uh, you know at some point, learning for the sake of it is interesting. But yeah, really, it's what they're doing is where the learning is really amplified and really solidified, I guess, too. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
so
man,
yeah.
100%. The catch is like the person who only does and never learns, right? And I think there's this balance of courage and competence. I always say that courage is scarcer than competence, and that courage is also more important than competence, right? But if you have a person who's 100% courageous and never spends the time to become competent, that's when you get someone people call an idiot, right? So yes, courage is like I think courage is probably one of the most important traits, um, but it also needs to be tempered by an element of learning. So I think I think we do like need a balance of them, but that's kind of how I think about that divide.
Mm. No, that's a good take, I think. One thing I want to dive into a bit more is this idea of like independent thought that you mentioned earlier. And I feel like it is hard to be an independent thinker. I think most people, to some degree, aren't. And it's hard to kind of snap yourself out of like thinking what everyone else thinks and kind of have your own take and be able to sort of stand stand up with your own take and be like, this is what I think, here's why, and etc. I mean, how do you think about that, and how do you approach situations and trying to sort of stick your own independent thought onto a situation that might be happening?
Oh man, it's hard. I don't think I have an answer, like a set answer for like how someone comes about becoming an independent thinker. Um, I think at the fundamental level, it requires being radically open minded. That's probably like the precursor of independent thought. And I have an article on my blog. My blog's just my first name, last name.com, called Radical Open Mindedness. So I think that's like the first part. I think the second part is adopting the default of questioning everything, right? Like I think some people's default is that society the way it is good. My default is that society the way it is bad, and the underlying the underlying action, or that the action that underpins that, is break the rules, right? And I've thought about like break the rules throughout my whole life. In high school, if I was given homework, I wouldn't do homework, and the reason why was because I thought there were more productive uses of my time if I wanted to get a good mark. It's not, and like what I want to emphasize is not break the rules to just like flunk stuff. It's break the rules if you see like a more productive way of doing things. So in my instance, I was like, well, I can dedicate this time to this particular homework task to something else, and therefore it's more productive. And that I call independent thought. Obviously, that needs to be counterbalanced against the risks of punishment, right? And this is why punishment is like a really interesting thing, because when you break the rules, the consequence tends to be getting punished. And that punishment serves a purpose. It's the purpose it serves is to prevent people breaking the rules and flunking. But if you're breaking the rules with the right motivation, if you're breaking the rules to do better rather than to do worse, then you can like slowly get away with it in time. So like that homework example is one example. My gap year was another example, right? The rule was uni or like a travel gap year, whereas learning gap year was something different. I think another way I kind of broke the rules was like at university. The idea is if you want to apply to somewhere like Goldman Sachs, you need to be at uni for 3 or 4 years. You need to have done like all these different internships, etc. And I'm just like, why is that the social default? I think part of it is because it makes it a little bit easier to get in the door. But like realistically, if you're very deliberate about telling your story in an interview and prepping for the interview and gaining the right combination of traits to interview well, there's no reason you need to follow that default of 4 years in uni com law student to go into investment banking. So 1.5 years into uni, I'm like, well, I might as well interview for Goldman Sachs. I probably won't get it, but I might as well. Worst case, I just learn a lot, right? Worst case, base case is that I fail and learn a lot. So I think the overarching thing is like don't accept defaults, question everything. So that's and the precursor to all that is radical open mindedness. So I'd say they're the pillars of like becoming a more independent thinker over time.
I think that's really cool, and I think that's a really good answer because I think yeah, the open mindedness and the independent thought are really sort of very fundamental, very important skills when it comes to doing anything that's really insightful, unique, useful, outside the mold, any of these kinds of things. Really, any sort of big innovation comes from independent thought. So it's super important that we try and develop this kind of stuff. So yeah, it's great to hear that you're sort of yeah. I think that's a great answer. I think I'm going to be
Yeah,
borrowing some of that insight.
I'll jump in though. Like, we do and we don't with independent thought. Like, if the whole world were independent thinkers, nothing would get done, right? And the ability to copy others and learn from others is what actually allows us to learn very quickly. That's how we learn to walk. It's how we learn to talk. It's how we learn to like interact socially. Like the most independent thinkers of all are people with Asperger's. That might make them good Elon Musks who are doing something that's completely mind blowing. But like for the average person, you don't want like a 100% independent thought. If you have a scale of like completely copycat to completely independent, you don't want to be 100% at either end, right?
Mm,
And there's always like, where do you want to sit in the middle? And I don't necessarily think we should um, idolize a certain spot on the scale. I think it's more a matter of understanding of like what motivates us and what drives us, right? Where we don't ever want to be is we don't ever want to be the copycat that doesn't realize they're being a copycat, right? The copycat that is going about life as a product of everyone else and never actually has the awareness to see it. So I think that's like an interesting like temper to the idea of you have to be independent the whole time, because I don't necessarily think that's true.
mm. It's a good it's a good counterpoint. It's a good point.
I'll argue both sides.
Yeah.
I
No,
just think
yeah.
like something I always say is like there's all this like productivity. This is how you should be advice, and I think like
Mm,
all of it is wrong and all of it is right. It just depends on like, is it fit for you, right? It all has to be personal. I don't actually think there's like one
mm.
answer. What I say is like what works for me.
Yeah. No, I think that's I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah, I think even I've been reflecting a lot recently on like um, having your own sort of what you want your life to look like at some time period in the future, and then evaluating career decisions or life decisions based on like you said what makes sense for you rather than like what is perhaps the popular decision to make at a certain time, whether it's to like chase a job that pays more or is more like has more clout or like whatever it might be. Sometimes those filters aren't the right ones. Like for you, if you want to like if your end goal is to like work fully remotely in a cabin in the woods, like and that's kind of what you want to do, then like working 16 hours a day in the middle of the city like is just not what you want to do. So yeah, I agree with that. That yeah, we should apply things, to your own situation. Definitely.
Yep. Yep.
Cool. Well, there's a lot of different topics I want to get to. So apologies in advance. I'm gonna perhaps like just change things like a fair bit with my next few questions.
Mate,
But
that's
what?
how I roll. I'm
Yeah.
always down for jumping around multiple ideas in a very short
Yeah.
time.
Perfect. Well, one thing I want to ask is so you're someone that shares a lot, LinkedIn, Twitter, various social media places, you're kind of everywhere. I want to ask uh, when you're sharing things, what is a particular idea that you've shared that people it didn't really take off as much as you would have hoped, or perhaps people kind of underappreciated, or in your opinion, people just don't see the value in what you've said as much as you do?
Yeah, man, I love this question. I actually think this is like a natural follow-on from independent thought, because I think the pieces of content I've released that are the most underappreciated tend to be the things that are the most independent thinking, right? Because frankly, I think people often like to hear things they already kind of believe in. So things that are underappreciated, the things that are slightly more independent. There are probably three of them I'll mention in particular. One is the idea of courage is more important than competence, and I think if you look at people who start certain startups, yes, they're very competent, but there are thousands of people as competent as them. I was listening to Doug Leone, who runs Sequoia Capital, the largest, most successful VC fund in the world, maybe not the largest, but the most successful in the world. And he said, yes, he's smart. Yes, he has high EQ, but there are thousands of other people who are just as competent as him. What enabled him to get to where he is a combination of luck and courage. And the reason I say they go hand in hand, and the reason why is that being courageous brings luck, right? You need to be in the arena for luck to strike. So I think that's like the first idea. Courage is more important than competence. The second idea, I often like say to people, I want to live to 100. And the response I get back is, what? No, fuck no, I want to die at 80. And the reason people say that to me is like, we have this trope in the world of you get to 80 and you're a cripple. The last 20 years of your life really, really suck. I think a realistic vision of the future is people get to 70 years old, and instead of thinking, oh, I'm kind of decrepit, I'm not going to do much for my next 10 years, instead of that, at 70 years old, you're sitting there thinking, what meaningful experiences, what things am I going to create for the next 30 years of my life, right? And to get to that point of 70-year-olds having that mentality, they need to be healthy, right? You need to have 70-year-olds who look and feel like 60 or 50-year-olds. And that's perfectly possible. There are these places in the world called blue zones, and blue zones are places where people live to 100 years old or over 100 years old. That's like the average age. And the question is, okay, why do people live so long in these places? And it's not because they're meditating every day. It's not because they're wearing wearables or taking supplements. Instead, it's because culturally they sleep, they exercise, they eat healthy, they have good relationships. So I think like a large part of enabling people to get to 70 and be healthy is like changing culture, right? Having a culture where things like exercise, sleep, low stress, eating healthy are like cultural norms. So like bringing that all together, that the second idea that I think is like somewhat underappreciated is that we can and should think about living to 100. The third idea I think is underappreciated, and I'm just judging this based on like the very few Twitter reacts it got, is that professionalism is mimetic, not innate. And I see a spectrum of like, it goes back to the independent. You have independent at one end, and then you have copycat at the other end. Another word for copycat is mimetic. Mimetic is the idea that we inherit our desires and our convictions from others, right? So I think a lot of how people engage in the world is copycat mode, mimetic mode, the mode of inheriting desires and convictions from others. And I think professionalism falls into this mimetic copycat bucket. The most professional people in the world are call center folks. And then you like kind of move down the chain. You might end up with like an investment banking analyst as someone who's somewhat mimetic, right? They're very professional. Whereas the investment banking managing director is normally less professional than the analyst. So I think professionalism is largely a matter of like copying others. Whereas if you go to the other end of the spectrum, non-professionalism, you have founders, you have Jack Dorsey, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, Ryan Breslow, Steve Jobs, right? And I think what they have is an independence of thought. So I actually think non-professionalism equals independence, whereas professionalism can often equal conformism. Now it's a balance, right? I'm not saying all of a sudden just walk into the office barefoot. I'm just saying like be aware of how you're acting and why you're acting a certain way. So bringing that all together, that idea is the idea that like professionalism is mimetic. It's not innate. We're not innately born with it.
Mm. Yeah, it's some interesting food for thought there. Definitely. Yeah. No,
Again, I don't think it's bad. Like I could give you 10
mm,
arguments why
yeah.
professionalism really matters as well.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah,
not
yeah.
that I'm saying one's bad or another.
Yeah, yeah.
One's bad or one's not bad.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I feel like when you if you come into an organization, you sort of even just like adopt the culture that's there, and so it's almost like a I don't know. It's difficult to kind of set like you know what I mean. Like yeah, like you said, you can't just walk into the investment banking office with like no shoes on and like a t-shirt or whatever it is, like and a singlet perhaps.
No,
Like
but
you
the
kind of
MD can, the senior
yeah
can, which is really
yeah
which is really interesting, right? It's like,
mm,
um, you get more freedom to be independent the more senior you get. That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it
Mm,
is that people who are more independent get further. That's another
mm,
way of looking at it. I also
mm,
think it's like a balance. Like there are some people who interview and they're like in robot mode, right? Robot mode is like 100% professional mode. They won't get
mm,
ahead in that interview. Whereas some people enter the interview and they're yes, they have a balance of professionalism, but they also have human mode, right? They have
mm,
personality mode, and personality can often be somewhat opposed to professionalism. If you're too bubbly, it can be non-professional. But typically in an interview, you need to balance it. You can't be full robot, and obviously you
mm.
probably don't want to be talking about your dating life. Though I do have some friends who will do that. Where if he listens to this, he'll know who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But again, it's like a balance. It's a spectrum. Both things need to be
Mm.
at play.
No, definitely. No, that's interesting. Well, I'd love to like continuing the sort of unrelated questions thread, and ask you. This is a Tim Ferriss classic question. What has been for yourself in your journey your most valuable investment, whether it's time or an investment of money?
Okay, I'll start with time, and the reason why is I think time is more valuable than money. Generally speaking, you can't buy time. You can make more money. In terms of time, two best investments for me. Um, One is Next Chapter. So Next Chapter is this series of communities I run, and the reason why that's been really really valuable is because so what Next Chapter is, we run a community of the most curious, ambitious, kind, talented people we can find. James, that's how I know you because you're like in the
Mm,
Next Chapter community. And the reason why that's been like the best investment of time for me is because I'm a big believer in the idea that we are the average of the people around us, right? And next chapter has been just like building this awesome tribe of people around me, and that changes what's normal, right? I can be copycat mode. Like I think our human natural default human tendency is copycat mode. I can be copycat mode, but now the things I'm copying are really really useful, right?
mm,
So I think I don't have to be as independent within next chapter. I can just copy everyone else, and I'll probably do pretty well.
mm,
So that's like first investment of time. Second
mm,
investment of time would be Ultraviolet, which is an angel investing syndicate I started, and we're a group of founders and creators investing in other founders. And creators means like podcasters, YouTubers, newsletter writers, community managers, etc. So they'd be the two best investments of time for me. Um, Investment of money. Ironically, the investments of money I tend to like the most are the things that buy me more time. So they often look like productivity tools. They might look like a better laptop. They might look like AirPods, so I can just like chuck them on really easily and listen to podcasts whenever. They might look like I've got a 39-inch monitor in front of me, and that's because it saves me time when I'm working. It makes me more productive. So I think a lot of my investments of money are like productivity tools. Best investment of money from like an actual investment perspective was pure luck. It was an angel investment that went 15x in like 2 months, but that is a fluke.
wow.
And if I make like 20 more investments, I'm probably never ever going to have that again. Um,
Mm.
so like bringing all that up, I think investment of time matters more than investment of money. Just because we can't buy more time.
Yeah, no, I agree with that absolutely. And folks who are listening, if you haven't already heard of Next Chapter, it's pretty incredible community you guys are building over there, and I've loved being a part of it. Met some super interesting people in there, and it's been super valuable.
Awesome,
And
man. We are opening our intake soon. So if you follow me on LinkedIn, follow Next Chapter on LinkedIn, you'll see that in a week or so we're going to be opening up the next intake of people into the community. So you can check it out, see if it's the kind of thing you may or may not be interested in, and yeah, go from there.
sweet, well, yeah, we'd love to see some more people in there. I think it's pretty cool. I don't think I've even I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I've even met anyone in person from there, and I feel like I'm still getting quite a lot of value out of it. So I don't know if that says anything, but certainly I think if folks are interested, they should definitely consider being a part of it. Um, let's continue the thread here. So one question I want to ask you was around the idea of that there's often this perhaps a paradox type situation where you've got let's enjoy the present moment and just be really grateful for what we have, and then the flip of that is then like let's not be okay with where we are and really drive towards some desired sort of future state. And I'm curious to understand like how you think about that. You know, that sort of enjoying the present while still chasing things that you want and things like that. I mean, yeah, how do you approach that? It's quite an open question, I know, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Do both at once. And I don't actually think they're mutually exclusive. Like for me, I enjoy the process of working towards things. I get a lot of present energy by building, right? And it's not a discontentment with the present. It's like a complete contentment with the actual process of building in the present. Um, the other thing I'd say, because I think what that question kind of alludes at is that like idea of happiness that a lot of people talk about, right? There's this there's this idea of maybe if you're not present, you're not happy. And the way I kind of think about happiness is you ideally want to get to the point where you don't think about happiness. I actually don't think the happiest people are actively thinking about happiness. Instead, they just have routines that allow them to maintain a baseline high level happiness. Like I think my baseline happiness despite maybe seeming like someone who works hard, I think my baseline happiness is like 7 or 8, and it's because I don't think about it much. And what I mean, I just think about routines. So I make sure I sleep. I need to sleep. I need to exercise, and I need to not use social media too much. If I do those three things, and then I also like see my family at least a couple times a week, if I do those four things, I'm like guaranteed to be happy, basically. So that's kind of how I think about it. Just like have these routines that are just like a routine part of how you engage with the world, and then hopefully those processes take care of themselves. So like going back to your question, I don't think being future focused and present focused are mutually exclusive. I think they can go hand in hand.
Yeah, no, it's a good take. I think. Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I think that's a good way of thinking about it. Because yeah, I feel like yeah, sometimes at least for myself, I kind of can get stuck in this thing where it's like, oh, am I like desiring this like future so bad that it's like taking away from enjoying kind of the things I have now. And certainly, I think that's
Yeah,
a
no,
good.
I get what you're saying. Like
Mm,
they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, but they don't perfectly overlap either, right?
mm,
You can have a situation in the world where you have present pit against future, and it's like that Naval saying, which I think he appropriated from someone else, which is that desire is a contract you have with yourself to be unhappy until you
mm,
get what you want, right?
mm,
Desire is like this contract you have with yourself to be unhappy. So he's saying that desire and wanting more is like guaranteed to bring unhappiness, which is like true and untrue. It goes to like that Buddhist philosophy idea, which is that desire is the root of suffering. And I like agree and disagree, but I don't like. I think desire can lead to suffering. I don't necessarily think all suffering is bad, and I think I've got like a kind of hot take on this. You'll notice I probably like push back against all these conventional wisdom kind of points. And look, I can argue both sides, but I'll argue
mm,
this side that suffering isn't that bad. And I'll give a couple examples. Um, Lionel Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo or Roger Federer, right, or LeBron James, they suffer and go through more pain than basically anyone I've seen, right? They work so damn hard for what they believe in. But society glorifies that, right? If you're working super damn hard, you're sacrificing so much. You can't drink, you need to eat healthy, you have less time for family and friends. They sacrifice so much, but they're glorified because of it, because culturally it's fine to glorify sports people. But then you might get someone like, I don't know, Mark Zuckerberg or Warren Buffett, who sacrifice a lot, who work really hard, who hustle. And in the business world, you can be denigrated for working hard. You can be like kind of put down for that little bit of suffering. But I think it just depends on the game you're playing, right? If you're Messi, what you're innately good at is football, and exercising your talents to the best of your ability, exercising or enlivening your sense of meaning means working really hard to be a good football player, Whereas if you're Warren Buffett, you're a clear, independent thinker who likes deep analysis, exercising your talents to the best of your ability means working really hard to be a very successful investor and businessman. So I think suffering is interesting because in some instances people are like glorify it, and in some instances people completely denigrate it, right? So I think yes, desire can lead to suffering. Suffering isn't necessarily bad if it also is linked to something that brings you meaning.
Damn. That's deep.
Uh,
I like that a lot. Yeah, I haven't heard that explained like that before, but yeah, I agree with that for sure. Like, and I definitely see what you mean with the comparison there. Yeah, that's really interesting. Food for thought. All right, let's continue the assorted questions list. So one of these things, we've been talking about like independent thought. It's been a nice thread that's run through this. How do you think about like career? Like how do you approach your career in the sense of, and you perhaps already to some degree kind of started this where you did the learning year, Goldman perhaps like a year or two earlier than you're sort of supposed to do. How do you think about like careers I guess in a more macro sense, like and sort of optimizing for the things that you want out of your career? I mean, how do you? This is a very open question here, but I hope you have some ideas to answer. But yeah, I guess like how do you think about approaching your career?
Yeah, so on my website, I've got an article called Career Design Manifesto or something like that. And I present four heuristics or frameworks to help you decide what to focus on. And there's not meant to be some like set way of piecing together these frameworks. Instead, it's meant to be personal. The first of the frameworks, and this is the most important, is match your career to your nature. So the idea of this is that if we match our career to our nature, we're going to be really good at it and we're going to be energized for the long haul. There are other ways of saying that. Naval says, find what feels like play to you, but looks like work to others. In my mind, that's like another way of saying match your career to your nature. Sahil Bloom says, find your zone of genius, right? This is like the overlap of your interests, your talents, your skills that you've learned, etc. So I think like that match your career to your nature is the most important thing, right? Um, I don't think everyone should necessarily just like go for the biggest thing they can possibly do if that's like not in their nature. Um, the second part of that heuristic is early on in your career, optimize for learning. And learning can be what you learn and also how fast you learn, right? You want to do both. Like you want to learn very rapidly, but you also want to learn the right thing. And the question is, okay, how do I know what the right thing is? And we don't. So early on, literally try everything, get a feel for everything. I say university equals internship. And what I mean by that is like if you're not doing like a professional degree, professional meaning like medicine or engineering or something with a profession wrapped around it, if you're not doing that, then engineering equals internship. And what I mean is that use university to do internships in every single area and work at one to learn and then to work out which of those areas matches your nature. Um, and that will help you decide. So that's like one part of learning. Then the other part of learning is actually just like pace of learning. So I think pace of like rapid learners have a huge career advantage because they can do more in less time and you can put them in a new scenario and they can get up to speed very quickly. Um, Pace of learning. There's an article on my blog. Sorry to keep outsourcing this, outsourcing this to the blog, but there's an article on the blog called "The Most Important Skill," and the most important skill talks about how we can get much better at the pace of learning and how we can also choose what to learn. The next part of like careers is like this whole idea. So the next like framework is the whole idea of optionality, right? Should we pursue optionality or should we double down? And I think early on you want to pursue optionality. You want to be open to everything. You want to say yes to everything, etc. Then when you find what you love, you stop. You double down. You burn the boats, right? And once you find what you love, you need to stop pursuing optionality. Otherwise, you're just going to be an optionality man for your, or man or woman for your entire life. Um, so there's like that balance of optionality. Optionality is good early on. Find what you like and then double down. Right. If you know what you want, pursue it. And then the final part of this like career guide is a central belief of mine is that we need to take more risk, particularly more risk when we're younger. And the reason why is that when you're young, the downside of risk is zero. Typically, the downside is actually above zero because you learn a heap in the process. But let's say the downside is zero, whereas the upside can literally be almost unlimited. Um, so I'd say like a underarching belief I have with careers is take more risk. Interview for jobs you don't think you're qualified for. Start ventures or startups or societies that you don't think you're worthy of doing or qualified for doing. So like bringing them all together. First one, match your career to your nature. Second one, optimize for learning, both speed and then also optimize for learning the right thing. Second one is optionality, pursue optionality early on, but then burn the boats and double down and get rid of all optionality later on. And then the final point is like take risk, take more risk when you're younger.
Mm. That's a good framework, I think, certainly, and I think, yeah, I think if people can kind of use those things to direct themselves even slightly better, then I think those things quite useful. So definitely. Um, what about let's talk about like performance, like in the workplace or at university or whatever it might be. How do you think about like performing well in these different situations, and perhaps are there any things that you do? Maybe let's take the workplace as an example. Are there any perhaps applying independent thought to this as well? Are there any things that you do, any perhaps like rituals or techniques, things that you apply um, in the workforce to like perform at your peak, um, or even like how do you think about performing
Mm.
well in
Yeah.
the general sense?
First thing is game selection. So choose a game or choose a job you are uniquely well suited to playing. If you're Lionel Messi, you should probably play football instead of basketball because you're 5'6" or whatever. So that's the first thing, right? You want to actually choose the right job. If you are if you're in the wrong job, no matter how talented you are, you're going to struggle to perform at a really truly high level. So that's game selection. Second thing I'd say is communicate and over communicate. Um, tell your managers what work you're doing. Tell them when you've done it. It alleviates pressure on your manager if you're constantly keeping them up to date with where you're up to. Personally, I think I'm really bad at communicating. I think I can be slightly too I often feel like with communication, I'm pestering my manager to communicate. They have like better things to worry about. But I think the like mental switch that has to flick is the idea that no, you're not pestering them. You're actually alleviating or you're actually making their job easier because they don't have to like keep mental tabs on you the whole time. So that's the second thing, communicate. And then third thing, it's really, really trivial, but it's like be reliable. If you say you're going to do something, do it. Charlie Munger was asked what if there's like one trait you could like get rid of in people, or if there's one trait you wanted in people, what would it be? And he said reliability, which at the time I thought was really interesting. Like, why would reliability matter? I think the reason it matters is because like reliability compounds. If you faithfully rock up day in, day out, that compounds. The saying I used to kind of live by is the little things done consistently are the big things. And I've always kind of taken that approach. I don't think I'm ever working at like 100% or even 90%, but I think I'm like constantly at that 80%, which means that my happiness is high, my energy is always really high, but I'm like always there. Like, and I enjoy that, right? And it's that idea of like the little things done consistently are the big things. So those three. First one is like game selection, most important, and then like two more tactical things are like communicate and be reliable.
Yeah, I think those are great as well. Reliability, I agree with what you mean, because it's like if someone asks you to do something, you do it well. They might ask you to do slightly more, and then like you said, it just kind of compounds nicely. So yeah, I agree with that absolutely. Um, cool. Well, I've got like one last question for you. and and that is like, so you're in university currently. Let's rewind perhaps back to the start of uni and thinking about who Max was at that stage. Knowing what you know now and all the things that you've done, all the experiences that you've had, if you could go back to Max, who's just starting, well, he's just left school, let's say, what advice would you give to yourself?
Be more courageous, take more risks, break the rules. University equals internships. In other words, like you use the time to do internships, and then like again, be even more courageous. So that's the advice I'd go back and give myself.
Amazing. Yeah, the courage idea is really interesting one, and certainly I think I can be better. I think many of us can be better at applying that one. Um,
Yeah, man. I think I'm still like I actually still think it's a weakness of mine. I still think I don't take enough risk. I still think I can up courage, and it's iterative, right? Like the more you put yourself out there, the more courage, the more things you do that are courageous. The more you build up like thick skin to it. It no longer feels like being courageous; it just feels like the normal, right? And
mm,
that's why, again, going back, I love Next Chapter because being around people in there makes things that used to be courageous just normal, right? You just continue to like raise the bar on what's
mm,
normal, and that as humans, I think winding up with that independence of thought idea, um, our innate state is to copy others. If you put two babies in a room with 1,000 toys, they will fight over one toy. So our innate state is to copy others. Given that piece of information, I want to be around others or in a community where if I copy others, I end up in a really, really damn good place. Um, so
mm,
I think that's true of courage as well. If you're around people who up the bar on ambition and courage and proactivity, even starting a podcast like what you're doing, right? Like a third of the community bloody run podcast or something like that.
mm.
It's courageous. It's like it's a bold move. You put yourself out into the world. So I'd say that as well. As a closing piece of advice, be really deliberate about like trying to find people who lift you up and trying to be part of communities or collectives of people that create a culture where exceptional is normal.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and definitely, folks. Again, next chapter, it's been really great. So
Yeah,
yeah, I think what next week you said, Max. So that's exciting. Um,
yeah.
cool. Well, if people want to find out more about next chapter, find out more about yourself, where's the best place for them to go?
Connect with me / follow me on LinkedIn. Reach out at any time, and maxmarchione.com is my website as well. A few of the stuff I've spoken about, I've written about and put on there. I've realized that other stuff I've spoken about that isn't on there, I will soon write about and put on there because I'm passionate about it, as you might be able to tell. So yeah, that's where you can find me. My door's always open.
Thanks for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. If you want to get my takeaways, the things that I learnt from this episode, please go to graduatetheory.com/subscribe, where you can get my takeaways and all the information about each episode straight to your inbox. Thanks so much for listening again today, and we're looking forward to seeing you next week.